One of the biggest challenges that people often face when writing a list for a competitive Warhammer 40k event is what units should I include, and should I include multiple small units of 5 or should I combine those units to make big units of 10? So what I wanted to do today is share some of my experience from my many years in Warhammer 40k tournaments and give you guys some concepts that will hopefully help you decide how you go about approaching this situation and whether or not you want to run multiple small units or some big chunky units. So I'm going to break it down for you and hopefully give you some practical advice that you'll be able to use when writing lists for your next tournament. So with that being said, let's get into the video.
Welcome to the Blood God.
G'day guys, welcome to this episode where we're going to be talking about when it's appropriate to min-max squads and then what that means and how MSU works and how Death Stars work, with a little bit of a general kind of overview on a way that you can sort of approach list writing and make these sorts of decisions before you hit the tabletop. So let's start with some just general sort of definitions, right? So the MSU, that acronym, stands for multiple small units or many small units. And it is a playstyle where basically you take as many units as you can without adding any models to them. So you might run, 3 units of 5 possessed, 3 units of 5 chosen, a bunch of units of 5 legionaries, like just lots and lots of really small units, right? And there's a few reasons that you might want to do this. One of them being that if somebody dedicates enough shooting that would kill, say, 6 or 7, say, legionaries, right? But you only have squads of 5, it means that they're not getting the full efficiency out of the units that they're allocating to you, which means that they're sort of wasting damage. Whereas if you had 7, they would kill 7. So the 2 that you've put in, you've wasted. So the idea is basically if you take small squads, you're going to mitigate some of their damage and increase the survivability of your units, is the general idea. The other advantages to the MSU playstyle is that you have multiple units, so you've got redundancy built in, you can be across multiple spaces on the table, you can engage your opponent in multiple different areas of the battlefield, so there's a lot of utility in that regard. And you also gain access to more war gear as well, so particularly on things like legionaries that get free upgrades, but even on things like chosen, for example, if you take multiple units of 7 or 8, you're going to get less options for things like power fists, you're going to get less champions in your army, so you're going to get less damage dealers in that regard. So there's a few other smaller but still relevant reasons why you want to take multiple small units. The alternative to the multiple small units is something approaching a Death Star. Now, the classic Chaos Space Marine Death Star is the Terminator brick with the Black Rune of Damnation, the Illusory Supplication, Delightful Agonies, Mutated Invigoration, all of the various buffs that you can put on the unit. But Death Stars can be, that's a Death Star run pretty much to the extreme. You can run Death Stars that are a little bit more simple, like it might just be a unit of 10 possessed with the Black Rune, and that's it, Or it might be, there's all different types of Death Stars. The idea of the Death Star list is that you're taking units and you're maxing them out. You're getting really big units, but fewer units. And then you're stacking buffs on those units to make them more powerful than they would otherwise be. So that's the Death Star approach. And basically what I want to talk about is with the advantages of these two different approaches, how do you go about writing a list? So the Death Star approach, the other advantage, so there's lots of advantages to the Death Star. One is that any buffs that you put on that unit are going to affect more models. So for example, if you have a unit of 5 Terminators and you put the Black Rune of Damnation on it, you've spent 1 command point to give 5 Terminators -1 to be wounded. Whereas if you have 10, then you're getting that utility, a unit of 10, you're getting that utility across all 10 models for that same 1 command point. So you're getting more mileage out of that command point. Same goes for things like if you want to, put neg 1 to hit on them from the, say, the Night Lord stratagem or the Creations of Bile stratagem or whatever, right? If you, in like these sort of reactive mid-game stratagems, you're still going to be getting more utility out of those stratagems on bigger units. So stratagems being a resource and command points being a resource that's very hard to manage and very hard to optimize, having big units guarantees that you get that value from those stratagems, which is really, really important. The other things about the big units that make them far superior to the multiple small unit approach is that you get more value out of things like interrupting combat. So for example, if you have 2 units of 5 and they have 2 units of 5 and they charge in and they hit you with one of your units, when they hit you, then when you fight back, you're only going to fight back with 5 models if you spend the 2 command points to interrupt, right? If you don't spend the 2 command points, they're going to fight with both of their units of 5 before you do, assuming you don't have Mark of Slanesh. But yeah, they're going to fight before you, and therefore they're going to probably wipe you out. So you have to spend 2 command points to interrupt that sequence so that you can fight them back before them and hopefully, kill them. But when you do so, you're only going to fight back with 5 models. Whereas if you had 1 unit of 10 and they hit you with 2 units of 5, chances are they're going to strike you with 5 models, they're going to kill a couple of yours, and then you get to strike back with all 10 before their remaining 5 strike you. So that's really powerful. And it also works on the inverse, where if you have, if say they have 1 big unit of 10, if you throw 2 units of 5 in, you're going to fight with 5 or half of your available models, and then they're going to interrupt and kill the other half before you get to strike with them. Whereas if you just threw 1 unit of 10 in, you're going to get to fight with all 10 of your models, and then they won't even interrupt because you don't have any units left to engage in that combat. So you've been able to get maximum utility and work around that whole combat interruption process. So there's some massive bonuses to both of these systems, whether you want to go on the MSU route or whether you want to go on more of a Deathstar kind of chunky unit route. So the question then becomes, how do you decide which of these 2 methods you want to play and which is superior? Now, I'm a strong believer that when you have a situation where there's 2 things, both of which have serious pros and cons, instead of trying to work out some kind of crazy calculus and coming up with the pinpoint precision on efficiency based on percentages and all that sort of stuff, which you can do, and there's people that do this, instead of doing that, I recommend play a couple of games with the MSU, play a couple of games with the Deathstar, and just decide which one feels better for you. Go off feel, because I think there's, this game has so many different variables and so many different options that you can make any of them work. You've just got to find ones that suit your play style, suit your, temperament and your preferred method of play, and then go further down that route. So for example, for me personally, I much prefer the Deathstar play style. I really like buffing units to high hell, sending them in, doing massive amounts of damage with them, and creating problems for my opponent, because it's harder for them to deal with this unit, because if they throw multiple units into it, I'm going to interrupt and kill them, and if they don't throw multiple units in, they're not going to do sufficient damage. So I really enjoy that playstyle. Whereas I've got friends, some really, really competent, high-ranked friends, who much prefer the MSU playstyle. They much prefer having redundancy into their list. They prefer trading up, where they send a small unit in and it does more damage than it takes in return. 5 go in, they kill 6 or 7 of their opponent, and then they die, but that's a good trade because you killed more than you used. So I've got some friends that much prefer that play style, and they prefer being more like flying all over the place doing all this crazy stuff. And Chaos Space Marines can do both play styles really effectively. So ultimately, I think the best way to decide is to just run the list, play a couple games with your mate, and then play the other version and then be like, okay, did I prefer having multiple units running around, or did I prefer having big, chunky, scary units? That's the idea. So essentially, when you're looking at writing your list, once you've decided which of those two methods you prefer, then you want to start going down the route of optimizing that method. There is an argument to be said for having a mixed army where you've got some big units and a bunch of small units. That can work, but I find that's much harder to strike a balance. Whereas if you go, no, I'm going to be, doing a multiple small units style army, well, then it becomes really easy to go, okay, cool, I know my plan, I know what secondaries I'm going to take, like multiple small units. That's really good at things like behind enemy lines, engage on all fronts, those sorts of board control style objectives. So you can pick those and then build your list around them, where you go, cool, I'm going to bring 3 units of raptors, I'm going to bring 3 units of a single obliterator. They're my behind enemy lines guys. They're just going to deep strike in and fill those holes and create all these challenges. And that one obliterator, he's probably going to shoot a bunch of stuff, and then maybe he makes a charge, punches a bunch of stuff, he trades up, he achieves more than what his 90 points are worth, and now there's an obliterator in my opponent's backfield they have to deal with, and it's a challenge. So that's the MSU approach. And once you've decided to do MSU, you lean into it. You go, cool, I'm going to take nothing but small units, and I'm going to bring lots of them. This is really good for things like Emperor's Children, lots and lots of small units of Noise Marines, supported by some small units of other stuff. That's quite powerful. And the alternative is you go, no, I actually really enjoyed having that one big unit that's a problem for my opponent to deal with. So that's when you go, and this is the approach I took, where you go, cool, I'm going to take a big unit of Terminators, I'm going to put all of the buffs on them, I'm going to put all of the characters in the army that essentially become part of that unit because they run around together. And I'm going to present that as the only valid target, and then you start leaning into other secondary objectives like grind them down, things like Warp Ritual, because you're going to be able to effectively control the center of the table for a long period of time. You know that Warp Ritual is a safe pick because you're going to be able to protect your characters quite well because they're hidden behind a unit of Terminators that your opponent is going to really struggle to deal with. So that's where the Deathstar playstyle comes into it, and then when you're running the Deathstar, you want to optimize your list for that. And the way that I generally do that is, depending on how hard you want to go into the Deathstar, I think my version, the one that I ran at Uprising, the Australian ITC Championships, as well as the one that I ran at Men's Masquerade, I think that's pretty much as hard into Deathstar as you can go, where basically I'm taking the big Terminator brick, a whole ton of characters, and then what I'm doing is I'm taking a bunch of like Hellbrutes and Decimators and then putting them all in strategic reserves. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I'm basically telling my opponent, you have one target, and it's a target that you can't kill. And that's what Deathstars are all about, is going, yep, cool, you can't hurt this unit, and it's the only unit that you can shoot, so your entire shooting phase is wasted. Your entire combat phase is wasted, because the only way you're doing any damage to me is if you get into combat with those Terminators, you're probably going to kill only like a couple, and then they're going to kill anything that you throw into combat with them. So you're basically presenting your opponent with this insurmountable challenge, and then leveraging that to get your results. So that's sort of the two different approaches and how you go about optimizing for them. And basically, when you're trying to decide on how you're going to include a unit in your army, the first thing that you need to be doing is going, well, what type of army am I building? And that will inform what unit size. Like, I get a lot of people reach out to me and ask, oh, I want to bring 20 possessed. Should I bring 2 units of 10, or should I bring like 3 units of 5? And then instead of that, the remaining 5 possessed, maybe bring chosen or something like that. Like, how do I decide what's better, 2 units of 10 or 3 units of 5? And I think this is the part of the process that people are missing, is that before you get to that stage, you should be deciding, Am I doing a multiple small units style list? Or am I doing a Deathstar style list? And if you are deciding that you're doing a mixed list, my advice would be look at that unit that you're adding into your list and decide, well, what is its purpose? What am I bringing this unit in to do? Because and a good example of a mixed list might be an Emperor's Children list, where you've got a unit of 10 possessed, but then a whole bunch of units of 5 noise marines, right? And that unit of 10 possessed, you want to put the Black Rune on it, and you want to put Delightful Agonies on it, and you want to send it up to be a problem unit, while your MSU flank the board and take control of all the objectives, that sort of stuff. And that's a really good example of a well-optimized mixed list, where you've got the MSU components, but then you've also got this one unit which you're planning to stack multiple buffs on. Not as many buffs and not as important as the Terminator Death Star, but it's still a unit that's people are going to struggle to kill. Like, it doesn't just fall over to a stiff breeze. So that's an idea of a mixed hybrid kind of list that has some Death Star elements and some MSU elements, and that can be quite effective as well. And the way that you would decide in that Emperor's Children list whether or not you want to bring multiple units of 5 possessed or a single unit of possessed is by looking at what the role of that unit is. And in this instance, the role is you want something that can control the center whilst the rest of your army does ranged shooting and controls the flanks. You need something big and tough that can take the center of the table and hold it. And if you're trying to create something big and tough, one of the best ways to do that is to put multiple buffs on it. And if you're going to be putting multiple buffs on something, then you want to make that unit as big as possible so that you get maximum utility from those multiple buffs. So that's where that sort of possessed build comes in. And possessed in Emperor's Children are obviously very good because they gain the Slanesh keyword, which means that they can have Delightful Agonies cast on them. They can chase down your opponent when they fall back. There's a few different bits and pieces that possessed unit can do that's actually really, really important and really, really effective. So that's sort of the idea with the mixed bag unit. Whereas when you're writing the list and even if you're looking at an existing list that you have and you're considering, swapping a unit out, or you're considering, pivoting into a different, style, you want to look at each unit and think, well, what is this unit's point? Why does it exist? Why do I have this unit? And then when you're deciding that, that'll then inform what's the best way to run it. Like, if you're like, okay, cool, I want something that can punch on with my opponent when my opponent has big, scary units, right? Well, if your opponent has big, scary units and you want something that's going to be able to deal with them in melee, well, you don't want MSU for that, because MSU really struggle with that, because like I said earlier, your opponent's going to have the ability to interrupt you in combat, and they're going to be able to do massive amounts of damage to you. So ultimately, if that's the purpose of the unit in the army, you want that unit to be big. You want that unit to have lots of models in it, so that when you do put buffs on it, or when you do engage in combat, you get maximum utility from it. Whereas the alternative being that multiple small units, maybe it's like, well, I need something that can, if my opponent has multiple small units, I need something that can go out and deal with them without being a huge investment in itself. So you want something that can go, okay, cool, they've got like 5 Battle Sisters on an objective over there. I want to be able to go out and kill those 5 Battle Sisters, but I don't want to have to send a fucking unit of 10 Terminators and 5 characters to go do it. Well, that's where the multiple small units come in, and that unit of Raptors that you've got in your list, maybe it doesn't need to be a 10-man unit of Raptors. Maybe 5 is fine, and it's the thing that the purpose of it in the list is to go and deal with those situations. So, yeah, that's my general sort of approach to list writing in Warhammer 40k. Is decide what playstyle suits you, and the best way to do that is to play a bunch of games with both playstyles, and then just get a feel for it and be like, you know what, I really enjoyed having tons of units. That felt really good. Or you might be like, I really enjoyed having one unit my opponent couldn't handle. Pick which one of those two methods you're most comfortable with, or it might be that you preferred having a variety, you preferred having a mix. Either way, pick pick one style, and then once you've picked a style, you then go and lean into it and write the list with that informed, picking your secondaries based on your playstyle, and then picking your units based on your secondaries. So yeah, that's a nice, hopefully a nice, quick and interesting video for you guys on the fundamental differences between Death Stars and multiple small units. And yeah, I hope you found it interesting. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, all that good shit, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers. Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, all that good shit. And also check out our Patreon, where you gain access to our monthly giveaways and competitions. You also gain access to our Patreon exclusive Discord and the ability to purchase Patreon exclusive dice. We also have apparel like this if you'd like to show your support, and neoprene objective markers. All the links are in the description, and I very much appreciate any support that you're prepared to give. It definitely goes a long way to helping me improve and grow this channel and improve the quality and frequency of the content I'm able to provide for you. So with that being said, we're going to end this video here. Thank you again for tuning in. Thanks for all the support, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Blood for the Black God!